My husband had been secretly seeing my sister for 2 years. She got pregnant by him. I found out accidentally through their messages. I said nothing. I just texted my sister, "Come for dinner on Friday." When she walked in, "Good day, dear listeners. It's Diana again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I used to think I had a good life. Not a perfect one. Nobody does. But a solid, honest, American kind of good. A house in a quiet suburb of Columbus, Ohio, with a porch I actually used. A husband named Daniel who coached weekend soccer and made decent coffee. A career I'd built from nothing. 12 years as a hospital administrator, the kind of job that exhausts you and fills you at the same time. And my sister Claire, who lived 20 minutes away and had been my closest friend since we were girls sharing a bedroom in our parents' house in Cincinnati. That's the before. I need you to see it clearly, because everything I'm about to tell you happened inside that life, underneath it, while I was busy living it. Daniel and I had been married for 9 years. We weren't one of those couples who finish each other's sentences, but we were steady. We had a rhythm. Dinners on weeknights, hikes on Saturdays, the kind of companionable silence that I'd always taken for contentment. Looking back, I wonder now, was it ever really contentment? Or was I just too tired to look closely? Claire was 34, 2 years younger than me. She was the kind of woman men noticed. Long dark hair, easy laugh, the sort of energy that fills a room without trying. She'd had a string of relationships that never quite worked out. And over the years, I'd listened to every one of them unravel. I made her tea. I drove her home when she cried. I was her person. That's what she called me. "You're my person, Meg." The first sign came in the fall, about 18 months before everything broke open. I came home early from a conference in Cincinnati. A pipe had burst at the hotel, and they'd sent us home a day ahead. I remember pulling into the driveway and noticing Claire's car parked 2 houses down, which struck me as odd. She usually parked right in front. I didn't think much of it then. Daniel said she'd stopped by to drop off a book she'd borrowed. Claire confirmed it the next time I saw her, laughing lightly. I didn't want to block your neighbor's mailbox. Small, ordinary, forgettable. Except I found myself remembering it later, when other small things started to accumulate. Daniel began checking his phone differently. Not more often, but differently. He'd angle the screen away or set it face down, which he'd never done before. When I asked if everything was okay at work, he said yes, just a difficult project, and kissed me on the cheek in a way that felt practiced. Claire, meanwhile, started canceling our Thursday lunches. Once, twice, then a third time. She was always apologetic, always had a reason, but the reasons started to feel like stage props. Plausible, but hollow. Then there was the night in February. I'd woken up at 2 in the morning. I've always been a light sleeper. And Daniel wasn't in bed. I found him in the kitchen, standing at the window in the dark, phone to his ear. He ended the call the moment he heard me on the stairs. "Just couldn't sleep," he said. "Work stuff. Go back to bed." I did. I shouldn't have, but I did. By March, I had a feeling. Not proof, not even a real suspicion yet. More like a cold draft under a door you can't quite locate. Something was off. Something in my own house had shifted without my permission. The morning I found out, truly found out, was a Tuesday in April. Daniel had left his phone on the kitchen counter while he showered. I wasn't snooping. I want to be precise about that. The screen lit up with a message notification, and I saw Claire's name, and then I saw the first 4 words of the message before the screen went dark again. 4 words were enough. I didn't pick up the phone. I stood very still in my kitchen, in my house, in my life, and I let those 4 words rearrange everything I thought I knew. The coffee was still brewing. A bird was singing outside the window. The ordinary world was going on as if nothing had ended. I poured myself a cup of coffee. I sat down, and I thought very clearly with a steadiness that surprised me, I need to know everything before I do anything. That evening, while Daniel watched television and Claire texted me a heart emoji for no particular reason, I sent my sister a simple message: "Come for dinner Friday." She replied in 30 seconds. "Of course. Can't wait. Should I bring wine?" "No," I typed, "just come." The 4 days between Tuesday and Friday were the longest of my life. Not because I was falling apart, I wasn't, and that scared me almost as much as what I'd seen on that screen, but because I had to continue being myself while something inside me had gone completely still. I went to work. I answered emails. I sat in a budget meeting on Wednesday morning and gave notes on a staffing proposal, and nobody in that conference room could have guessed that my entire interior life had been reduced to a single, cold, repeating question: how long? At night, while Daniel slept beside me, I lay awake and did the arithmetic. How long had this been going on? I thought about the parked car 2 houses down, the face-down phone, the February night at the kitchen window, the canceled lunches. I thought about Claire at our last family Christmas, how she'd touched Daniel's arm when she laughed at something he said, and how I had registered it for half a second and then dismissed it as nothing because you don't suspect your sister. You don't. That's the deal. I thought about what I stood to lose. The house, we'd bought it together, both our names on the mortgage. My financial life was intertwined with Daniel's in the way that 9 years of marriage makes inevitable. Joint accounts, shared investments, a retirement fund, tax filings going back nearly a decade. We didn't have children, which was either a mercy or a wound depending on the hour. But we had a life that was legally and practically entangled in ways that would take years to unravel, if I decided to unravel them. And then there was Claire, my sister, the person I had called from the hospital parking lot after a hard shift, the person who had held my hand at our mother's funeral, the person who had called me her person. I sat with the grief of that for exactly 1 night. Wednesday into Thursday, I let myself feel it, all of it, the betrayal and the loss, and the particular horror of realizing that 2 people you loved had chosen each other over you repeatedly, for God knows how long, and smiled at you across dinner tables while they did it. I cried in the shower Thursday morning, quietly, with the water running hot. Then I stopped. I stopped because I understood something. Grief was a luxury I couldn't afford yet, not until I knew the full shape of what had happened. And I needed to know not just for my own sanity, but because knowledge was protection. Knowledge was the only weapon that couldn't be taken from me before I was ready to use it. So I made a plan. The first version of it, rough and provisional, sketched out in my head during the drive to work Thursday morning. Step 1, confirm what I suspected. The glimpse of the text message wasn't enough. I needed something concrete, something undeniable, something that couldn't be explained away. Step 2, understand the legal landscape before I moved. I had a friend from college, Patricia Reeves, who'd become a family law attorney in Columbus. We had lunch twice a year and stayed close in the way that good friendships survive distance. I hadn't yet called her, but I knew I would. Step 3, say nothing to Daniel or Claire until I was ready. Nothing that would alert them. Nothing that would give them time to coordinate a story, or move assets, or disappear evidence. The dinner Friday was step 1. Not a confrontation, not yet. An observation. I wanted to watch them in the same room. I wanted to see what I had been too trusting to see before. I realized, approaching my own marriage the way I approached a hospital budget crisis. Systematically, without panic, looking for where the real damage was before deciding how to respond. Maybe that sounds cold. Maybe it was. But coldness was the only thing keeping me functional, and functional was what I needed to be. Friday came. I made pasta. A recipe Daniel loved, one I'd made 100 times. I set the table for 3. I opened a bottle of wine but poured myself only water. I needed to be clear. When the doorbell rang at 7, I dried my hands on a dish towel and walked to the door. I remember thinking, look at her face when she sees him. Look at his face when she walks in. I opened the door. Claire stood on the porch in a yellow blouse, holding a bottle of wine she'd brought despite my instructions. She was smiling the way she always smiled, wide and easy and warm. I smiled back. I let her in. I hugged her. And over her shoulder, I looked at my husband standing in the hallway. He had gone very still. The dinner lasted 2 hours and 20 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. Claire opened her wine. Daniel recovered himself quickly, too quickly, and moved into host mode, offering to take her jacket, asking about her drive over. They were careful. I saw that immediately. There was a studied casualness between them, a careful not touching that was, in its own way, more revealing than any accidental contact would have been. You don't work that hard to seem normal around someone unless normal requires effort. I watched. I asked Claire about her job. She did marketing for a mid-size software company. And I watched Daniel's eyes while she answered. I watched how Claire lifted her wine glass and then set it down without drinking much. I watched how, when she reached across the table for the bread, she pulled her sleeve down over her wrist in a small, unconscious gesture. I filed it all away. After dinner, I excused myself to check on something in the laundry room. A transparent excuse, but neither of them questioned it. I stood in the hallway just outside the kitchen doorway for 45 seconds. I heard almost nothing, a murmur, a single low word from Daniel that I couldn't make out, then silence. When I walked back in, they were both looking at their phones. Claire left by 9:30. She hugged me at the door and said it had been so good to see me. I hugged her back. I told her we'd do it again soon. When I turned around, Daniel was already at the sink washing dishes. His back was to me. I said I was tired and going up to bed. He said goodnight without turning around. I sat on the edge of our bed for a long time in the dark. The next morning, Saturday, Daniel went to his weekly soccer coaching session. He was gone by 8. I waited until his car turned the corner at the end of our street, and then I went into his home office. I wasn't looking for his phone. He always had that with him. But Daniel was a man who wrote things down. Old habit, he called it. He kept a small paper planner, the kind with weekly spreads, in the top drawer of his desk. I'd teased him about it for years. That morning, I wasn't smiling. I opened the planner to the current week, then I went back through the previous months. It took me about 20 minutes to understand the language. His entries were abbreviated, but once I had the key, they were legible. Initials, not names. Times, locations written as single words. Downtown, park, seas. The initial C appeared for the first time in a planner entry from 11 months ago, then again and again. 11 months of a paper trail in my husband's own handwriting, sitting in the top drawer of his desk. I photographed every relevant page with my phone. Then I put the planner back exactly as I'd found it. On Monday morning, I called Patricia. She was careful and measured on the phone, the way good attorneys always are, gathering information without committing to conclusions. I told her I believed my husband had been having an affair and I needed to understand my position before doing anything. I didn't tell her yet who the affair was with. I wasn't ready for anyone else to know that detail. Patricia scheduled me for a consultation that Wednesday. She told me to document everything I'd already found, to avoid moving or hiding any shared assets, and, most importantly, to say nothing to my husband that might prompt him to take any financial action before I had legal advice. I thanked her and hung up and sat in my car in the hospital parking structure for 10 minutes before I went in to start my shift. Then came the confirmation I hadn't expected. It was the following Thursday. I came home from work to find a voicemail on our landline. We still had one. Daniel had insisted on it for emergencies. The message was from a Dr. Avery Cho's office, an OB/GYN practice across town. The message was brief, a reminder about an appointment for a Ms. Claire Hartwell, who had listed this number as an alternate contact. Claire's last name was Hartwell. Her middle name was our mother's name, and she had listed our home landline as a backup number for her OB/GYN. I played the message 3 times. Then I sat down on the kitchen floor, the actual floor, because my legs had stopped working for a moment. She was pregnant, or trying to become pregnant, or had just found out. The voicemail didn't specify, but the OB/GYN appointment, the careful not drinking at dinner, the sleeve pulled over her wrist, it all connected now with a horrible, precise clarity. My sister was pregnant, and the father was my husband, and I had been the last to know. I saved the voicemail. I sent myself the audio file by email, and then I called Patricia and left a message. I have more information. Can we move the Wednesday meeting up? Patricia moved our meeting to the following Monday. I spent the weekend reorganizing myself. Not emotionally, not yet, but practically. I printed the photographs of the planner pages. I saved the voicemail recording to a secure cloud account I created with a new email address Daniel had no access to. I wrote out a timeline in a notebook I kept in my car. Every date, every observation, every piece of documentation. 12 pages front and back in my careful administrator's handwriting. Monday morning, I drove to Patricia's office in the short north and laid it all out for her. Patricia was 51, elegant, and had spent 20 years in family law. She did not flinch at what I told her. She asked precise questions. She took notes. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "You've done exactly the right things. Now here's what happens next." What happened next was a set of concrete, legal, methodical steps. Patricia explained that Ohio is an equitable distribution state. Marital assets are divided fairly, not necessarily equally, and the court considers the full picture. Adultery, she told me, while not always financially decisive, can be relevant. She told me to open a personal checking account in my name only and begin directing a portion of my direct deposit there. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would look like hiding assets, just establishing financial separation. She told me to photograph or document the contents of our shared accounts. And she told me that when I was ready to file, we would file, and I should let her handle the communication. I left her office feeling, for the first time in weeks, something close to forward motion. I opened the personal account that afternoon. I quietly photographed our financial statements at home that evening while Daniel watched the news in the next room. I didn't know that Claire had noticed something. I found out later, piecing it together from what happened next, she had tried to call the OB/GYN's office to change the alternate contact number, and when they told her a message had already been left at that number, she'd gone very quiet. She'd called Daniel. And Daniel, I will give him this much, he was not a stupid man, had started watching me more carefully. He noticed, I think, that I was sleeping differently, that I'd stopped asking about his work week, that I moved through our house with a new kind of efficiency, as though I were already beginning to pack it up in my mind. It was the 3rd week of May when they came to the house together. Daniel texted me that afternoon. "I'll be home by 6. We need to talk." I was in my office at the hospital. I read the message and then set my phone face down, the same gesture I'd once noticed him make, and finished what I was doing. I got home at 5:50. They were both in my living room when I walked in. Claire was sitting on my couch. Daniel was standing by the window. I set my bag down. I said, "I only invited one of you to this conversation." What followed was not a confession. It was a performance, a coordinated one. I could see the seams of it. Daniel said they needed to talk to me together. Claire said she was sorry, that it hadn't been planned, that it had just happened. She was crying almost immediately. She'd always been a gifted crier. Daniel said he wanted to work through this, that he didn't want to lose his marriage, that therapy could... I held up my hand. "How far along is she?" I asked. Silence. "That's what I thought," I said. Then Daniel shifted. The apologetic husband dissolved and something colder came through. He said that I needed to understand the practical reality. We had a mortgage, shared accounts, 12 years of a life together. 9, I corrected him, 9 years. And that making hasty decisions could hurt all 3 of us. He said Claire's situation was complicated and they needed stability. He said I should think very carefully about what I stood to lose. "Is that a threat?" I asked. He said it wasn't a threat. He said it was a conversation. I said, "Leave my house." Claire started to say my name, Meg, in the voice she used when she wanted me to take care of her. I said, "Both of you." They left. I stood in my living room after the door closed and I listened to the silence of my own house, and I did not cry. I was too angry to cry. I was also, underneath the anger, something I hadn't expected. I was certain. Everything that had felt like doubt or fear or hesitation in the previous weeks had been burned away. I knew exactly what I was doing and why I was doing it. But I was also tired in a way that went all the way down to the bone. I called Patricia that evening and told her what had happened. She told me to document the incident. Date, time, who was present, what was said. I did. Then she said, "Take a few days. You're doing everything right. Let them sit with it." I took 4 days. I went to my friend Dana's house in Dublin, told her only that Daniel and I were separating, and spent the long weekend walking her neighborhood with her dogs and eating food I hadn't cooked and sleeping. Finally, without listening for footsteps. It helped. I came back steadier than I'd left. I came back on a Wednesday. The house was quiet. Daniel had moved some of his things to what I could only assume was Claire's apartment. He hadn't asked permission. I hadn't given it. We communicated through brief, neutral texts that could have been excerpts from a conversation between polite strangers. "I'll pick up the rest of my things Saturday. Fine. I'll be out from 10 to 2. The Wednesday I returned, there was a letter in the mailbox from Claire. An actual handwritten letter, 3 pages, in her slanted cursive that I'd known since we were children. I stood at the kitchen counter and read every word of it. She wrote about our childhood. She wrote about the summers at our grandmother's house in Kentucky, the way we used to stay up past midnight talking in the dark. She wrote that she was devastated by what she'd done, that she knew she had no right to ask anything of me, but that I was her sister, and she needed me to know she hadn't meant to hurt me. She wrote that the pregnancy was unplanned, that she was frightened, that she didn't know what her future looked like, and she couldn't imagine facing it without me. It was a beautifully written letter. Claire had always known how to arrange words. When I finished reading it, I folded it back into its envelope and placed it in the folder I'd started keeping for documentation. Not because I was cold. I felt the letter. I would be lying if I said I didn't. But because I understood what it was. It was an appeal to the version of me that had always made things right for her. It was an invitation to absorb her pain, to make her life easier, to be her person one more time. I was no longer that person. I had used up that version of myself. I didn't respond to the letter that day, or the next day. I gave myself time to be sure I was operating from clarity, not spite. Then I sent her a single text. I received your letter. I don't have anything to say to you right now. Please don't contact me again for the time being. She replied, okay, I understand. I love you. I put my phone away. Daniel, for his part, had gone quiet. He'd collected his things on Saturday while I was out as agreed and left no note, which was probably wise. He sent me a text that evening that said only, I hope we can find a way to do this without it getting ugly. I didn't respond. What struck me most during those days was the quality of my own silence. I had expected to feel more grief, more rage, more of the churning chaos I'd felt in the first week. Instead, I felt a kind of stillness that I can only describe as the feeling you get when you've made a decision so fully that the decision has settled into the body. I wasn't at peace. I was simply clear. The antagonists were watching, I knew, trying to gauge where I was, trying to understand what I was planning. That uncertainty, I suspected, was its own form of pressure on them. But I needed more than clarity. I needed people. I needed to stop carrying this alone. I called Dana on a Thursday evening and asked if she could come over. She arrived with takeout Thai food and 2 bottles of sparkling water, and no questions yet. We ate at my kitchen table, and then I told her everything. The full story from the car parked 2 houses down to the voicemail to the scene in my living room. All of it, including Claire. Dana is one of those people who can hear hard things without flinching and without immediately rushing to fix them. She listened to the whole story, and when I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Meg, I'm so sorry, and I need you to know. This is not about anything you did or didn't do. This is who they chose to be. It was a simple thing to say, but I had needed someone else to say it. We talked for 3 hours. Dana had practical questions. She was that kind of friend, about where I was in the legal process, whether I had support at work, what my financial picture looked like. She had a brother who had gone through a difficult divorce and knew something about the logistics. She offered to come to Patricia's office with me if I wanted company. She offered her guest room whenever I needed it. By the time she left at 11, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not happy, not okay, but held. Someone else knew the weight of what I was carrying, and that made it possible to carry it a little longer. I went to bed that night and slept without waking until morning. It was a Friday evening about 2 weeks later when they came again. I had not invited them. Daniel texted at 4 o'clock. Claire and I would like to come by tonight, just to talk. We want to find a way through this that works for everyone. The phrasing was careful, rehearsed, works for everyone, as if there were a version of this that worked for me, for the woman who had been deceived for nearly 2 years in her own marriage by her husband and her sister. I texted back, "You can come at 7, you have 30 minutes. I called Patricia first. She said, do not agree to anything on the spot, do not sign anything, do not make any verbal commitments. Record the conversation if you're comfortable doing so. Ohio is a one-party consent state. I set my phone on the kitchen counter with the voice recorder running before they knocked. They arrived together, which told me everything about what kind of conversation this was going to be. They came in and I did not offer them seats. I stood in the center of my kitchen with my arms at my sides, and I watched them take up positions in my space. Daniel near the island, Claire by the door to the hallway, as if she'd already calculated the exit. Daniel spoke first. He said he knew things had gotten difficult and that he understood I was angry, but that there were a lot of people whose lives were going to be affected by how they handled the next few months. He said the baby complicated things. He said he was willing to be fair, generous even, if we could come to an agreement outside of court. He said lawyers made everything worse. He said he hoped I could see that dragging this out would hurt me too. He said he hoped I could be reasonable. That word, I let it sit in the air between us. Claire spoke then. She said she was 11 weeks along. She said she was scared. She said she needed Daniel to be present for the baby, and that having a brutal divorce proceeding hanging over everything would make it impossible for any of them to build anything stable. She said, and this is the part I keep returning to, Meg, you've always been the strong one. You've always been able to handle things. We need you to handle this one more time. There it was, the architecture of every manipulation she'd ever run on me, laid bare in a single sentence. You've always been the strong one, which meant absorb this for us. Handle this one more time, which meant make yourself small so that we can expand. I said, what exactly are you asking me to do? Daniel said he wanted me to agree to mediation instead of litigation. He said he'd be fair with the assets. He pulled out a document, an actual printed document, and placed it on the kitchen counter in front of me. It was a proposed settlement agreement, 3 pages, clearly drawn up by an attorney who was not Patricia. You had that prepared before you came here, I said. We wanted to be organized, Claire said. I didn't touch the document. I said, you had an attorney draft a settlement that benefits you. You brought it to my home without warning, and you're presenting it as an act of goodwill. I paused. I want you both to hear this very clearly. I have an attorney. Any communication about settlement goes through her. You will not come to my home again without an invitation, and you will never again ask me to make myself smaller for your comfort. Daniel's face changed. The reasonable husband register dropped away, and I saw something harder underneath it. He said that if I wanted to take this to court, that was my choice, but that I should understand what litigation would look like. He said depositions were uncomfortable. He said that my financial life was going to be examined. He said the process had a way of complicating things for everyone. It was, dressed up in lawyer speak, a threat. Are you threatening me? I asked. He said he was being realistic. Claire put her hand on his arm. She looked at me with an expression I recognized as the one she used when she wanted me to feel sorry for her. Meg, please, she said, don't do this to us. I walked to my front door and opened it. They left. Daniel's jaw was set tight. Claire looked back at me from the porch step with those wide eyes, and for 1 second, I felt something that was not sympathy but was the ghost of sympathy, the shape of where it used to live before she burned it down. Then I closed the door. I leaned my back against it in the hallway and stood there in the silence. My hands were not shaking, but my heart was going fast, and I recognized what that feeling was. It was fear, clean and honest. Fear of the cost of this. Fear of what they might do. Fear of the long road ahead. But here's what I've learned about fear. It has two places it can go. It can drive you backward, or it can become the fuel for something harder and more certain than anything you could have built without it. I felt it move through me, and then I felt it settle. And what it settled into was not panic. It was resolve. Colder and more complete than anything I'd felt yet. I picked up my phone and texted Patricia. They came tonight, brought a draft settlement. I recorded it. She replied within 5 minutes. Perfect. Send me the recording. We'll talk Monday. The deposition was scheduled for a Thursday in September, almost 5 months after Patricia and I had first sat down together. In those 5 months, the legal process had moved with its own quiet momentum. Patricia filed for divorce in June. Daniel retained an attorney, a man named Greer, who wore good suits and had a reputation for aggression. Greer sent 3 letters in July that were, in tone, if not in language, versions of the threat Daniel had made in my kitchen. My client is prepared to litigate fully. My client believes the marital estate was improperly assessed. My client requests. Patricia read each one and wrote back in the measured, slightly bored language of someone who has seen this many times. What Greer did not know, and what Daniel apparently had not thought to consider, was the paper planner. I had photographed every relevant page. Patricia had reviewed them. Her assessment was direct. This is a documented timeline of an extramarital relationship in your husband's own handwriting. Combined with the voicemail, the dinner observations, and the financial record of unexplained transactions we've identified in the account review, we are in an excellent position. The unexplained transactions were something her financial analyst had found, a pattern of small cash withdrawals over 13 months, amounts that didn't correspond to any regular expense, totaling, by the end, just under $9,000. Money that had gone somewhere. Money whose destination I thought I could guess. Patricia's analyst had cross-referenced the withdrawal dates against the planner entries, and the overlap was not coincidental. 7 of the 14 dated entries corresponded within 48 hours to a cash withdrawal. It was the kind of detail that doesn't lie, not because it's dramatic, but because it's boring. Ordinary numbers on ordinary bank statements doing the quiet work of telling the truth. The deposition took place at Patricia's office. Daniel came with Greer. Claire, who had been called as a witness given the nature of the case, came with her own attorney, a quieter woman named Aldridge. I sat at the table with Patricia to my left and a stack of organized documents in front of me. The room was small and very plain. A court reporter sat at the end of the table. I remember the sound of the air conditioning, steady and neutral, and thinking that it was the right soundtrack for what was about to happen. Daniel went first. He was composed and careful. He answered questions in measured sentences. He described our marriage as having been distant and struggling for years. A revision of history delivered smoothly, as if he'd rehearsed it so many times he'd started to believe it. He acknowledged a relationship with Claire, but characterized it as something that had developed organically over a period of months, not 2 years. Then Patricia asked him to look at Exhibit 7. Exhibit 7 was a photograph of the planner page from 11 months before the deposition. One of the earliest entries with Claire's initial, with a time, a location, and a notation I'd only understood later, a dollar amount. It matched one of the cash withdrawals. Daniel looked at the page. Something shifted behind his eyes. He said he couldn't recall the specific entry. Patricia asked him to look at Exhibits 8 through 22, 14 planner pages, 14 months of his own handwriting. Greer called for a brief recess. During the recess, I sat quietly with my water glass and didn't look at Daniel. I looked at the table in front of me, at the neat stack of folders Patricia had organized, and I thought about the Saturday morning I had stood in his office with shaking hands and opened that planner drawer. I thought about how alone I had been in that moment, and how different alone felt now, sitting in a room full of people whose job was to hold the truth in place. When the deposition resumed, Daniel's answers were shorter, more careful. He contradicted himself twice on minor dates, the kind of inconsistency that looks small until it is placed beside a planner entry that says otherwise. Claire's deposition was the afternoon session. She came in looking pale, with a changed shape under her blouse. She was now showing. She had the expression she wore when she was preparing to be sympathetic and reasonable. The soft, careful affect of a woman who wanted to be believed. Aldridge clearly had coached her to be consistent with Daniel's version, a relationship that had developed over a matter of months, an unplanned pregnancy, two people who had not intended any harm. She delivered this version with controlled emotion, hands folded on the table. Then Patricia asked her a simple question. When did you first become romantically involved with Daniel Hartwell? Claire said, it was late last year, around October or November, I believe. Patricia said, I see. And to your knowledge, had Daniel ever been to your apartment before October of last year? Claire said no. Patricia placed a photograph on the table. It was a still from the building security camera footage of Claire's apartment complex, footage Patricia's investigator had obtained, showing Daniel's car parked in Claire's designated space on a date 16 months before the deposition. The date was visible in the frame. The license plate was visible in the frame. Claire stared at the photograph. Aldridge asked for a moment. During the moment, the only sound in the room was the air conditioning and the faint scratch of the court reporter's machine, which had not paused. Claire looked up from the photograph. She looked across the table at me for the first time since the deposition had begun. And I want to be accurate here. I did not smile. I did not react. I looked back at her the way you look at a document you are reading for the last time before you file it away. She said, I may have misremembered the date. Patricia said, that's all for now. Outside, in the parking lot afterward, Patricia and I stood by her car in the September afternoon. She told me we were in an excellent position. She told me the contradictions in their testimony would be valuable. She told me the financial record, the planner, and the security footage together created a picture that a judge would find difficult to dismiss. I said, good. She asked how I was doing. I thought about it for a moment. The afternoon light was doing something particular to the street. That late September gold that makes everything look a little like a photograph of itself. I noticed it, and then I noticed that I could notice it, which seemed like information about where I was. Then I said, I'm ready for this to be over. She nodded, not much longer. The divorce was finalized on a Monday in December, 4 days before Christmas. I had asked Patricia early in the process what a realistic outcome might look like, and she had given me the careful, qualified answer that good attorneys always give. It depends, but your position is strong. What strong turned out to mean, in practice, was this. I kept the house, Daniel's name came off the mortgage. He made a cash payment to buy out his share at a rate Patricia negotiated to reflect his contribution to the marital breakdown. The joint investment accounts were divided with me receiving 58%. The court having considered the documented cash withdrawals, the $9,000 that had, as I had guessed, gone to Claire over the course of their arrangement. The retirement funds were split. Daniel took his car and his personal belongings and a portion of the savings. In total, the financial outcome was substantially better than what he'd proposed in that kitchen document. The document he'd had an attorney prepare and brought to my home under the pretense of good faith. I thought about Patricia's face the first time she'd read it. The slight, controlled pause before she set it down and said, "He's not offering you nearly enough." I had felt something close to dark satisfaction in that moment, and I wasn't ashamed of it. I thought about that signing the final paperwork in Patricia's office. I thought about the 3 pages he'd slid across my kitchen counter with the confidence of someone who expected me to be too overwhelmed to read them carefully. I thought about how much he had underestimated me, and how that underestimation had, in the end, cost him more than a fair settlement would have. There's a particular kind of mistake that people make when they assume that a composed person is a passive one. Daniel had seen me absorb things quietly for 9 years and concluded that quiet meant manageable. He was wrong. Quiet had meant that I was paying attention. Quiet had meant that when the moment came, I would know exactly what I was looking at. Patricia handed me a pen. I signed my name on the final page, Margaret Ann Calloway, returning to the name I'd used before the marriage. I watched the ink dry for a moment. Then I set the pen down. It didn't feel like victory, exactly. I want to be honest about that. It felt like the closing of something very heavy, like setting down a weight you've been carrying for so long that the absence of it is its own kind of adjustment. I was lighter, and lighter didn't always feel like relief. Sometimes it just felt like empty, and you had to learn to live in the empty until something else grew there. Patricia walked me to the elevator. At the door, she shook my hand and held it for a moment longer than necessary and said, "You handled this well, start to finish." It was a professional thing to say, but she meant it, and I received it. But I was out, and everything I'd built was intact. Daniel, I knew from Patricia, had moved into Claire's apartment. She was 7 months pregnant by the time the divorce was finalized. I knew through Dana, who knew things through the network of mutual acquaintances that exists in any mid-sized city, that Daniel had taken a lower position at a company across town. The fallout of some professional disruption I didn't have full details on and didn't particularly need. His reputation in our social circle, such as it was, had suffered in the way that reputations suffer when the truth of a situation becomes generally known. People in Columbus talk. They always have. And the story, once it was out, had the particular quality of stories that make people uncomfortable. It was too specific to dismiss and too human to sensationalize. People just knew, and knowing changed how they looked at him. Claire had taken leave from her job. Her apartment, our home landline, had been the detail that unraveled everything, and I've thought about that more than once. The small, careless mistake that pulled the thread. She had listed our landline because she had grown up in a family that kept a landline, because she had always thought of our home as a second home, because I suppose she had allowed herself to get comfortable. Comfort is dangerous. I knew that now. On the afternoon the divorce was finalized, I drove home. My home, in my name, on my street, and I made myself dinner. Something good. Salmon with a sauce I'd been meaning to try. A glass of the good white wine I'd been saving for no particular occasion, and then decided this was occasion enough. I ate at my kitchen table with the lights on and the radio playing, and I didn't cry and I didn't feel triumphant and I didn't do anything dramatic. I just ate my dinner in my house and let the day be what it was. Before I went to bed, I went upstairs and stood at the window of the room that had been Daniel's office, which was now empty. I'd already made plans for the room. I was going to turn it into a proper reading room, bookshelves along 2 walls, a good chair. I could see it clearly in my mind. I'd been carrying the image of it for months, adding small details each time I returned to it. The lamp, the color of the walls, the specific silence of a room that belongs entirely to you. This is mine now, I thought. Not the room. I'd always owned the room, the life, the space, the mornings and evenings inside these walls, mine, in the clearest, most uncomplicated sense. I went to bed and slept without waking. It's been just under 2 years since I signed those papers. The reading room is finished. 2 walls of bookshelves, a deep armchair the color of old burgundy, a lamp I found at an estate sale in Bexley. On Sunday mornings, I make coffee and I sit in that chair with whatever I'm reading, and the house is quiet in the way that only houses you've chosen for yourself can be quiet. My career moved forward. In March, about 15 months after the divorce, I was offered the deputy director position at the hospital, a role I'd been building toward for years. I took it. The salary increase was significant, enough to refinance the house on my own terms and clear the mortgage faster than Daniel and I had ever projected. I hired a good contractor to redo the kitchen, which I'd wanted to do for years, and Daniel had kept deferring. I started running again, which I'd stopped in my early 30s. I run 3 mornings a week now, early before the neighborhood is fully awake. It's become the thing that sets the day's tone for me. Not because of the exercise, though that's part of it, but because an hour of forward motion before anything else happens reminds me that I am the one setting the pace now. Dana remains one of my closest friends. I've told her more than once that the night she came over with Thai food and asked her precise, practical questions was one of the moments that held me together. She always waves me off. That's what she does. In the spring of last year, I started seeing someone, a man named Tom, whom I met through a colleague. He's a civil engineer, quietly funny, the kind of person who reads the same book 3 times because there's always more in it. We take things carefully. That's the word we both use, carefully. We go to farmers markets on Saturday mornings. He knows the broad shape of what happened in my marriage. I've told him enough. He didn't make it a bigger deal than it needed to be, which was exactly the right response. I don't know exactly what I'm building with him yet, but I know that I'm building it with both eyes open, and that's different from what I had before. As for Daniel and Claire, I know what I know mostly through the unavoidable permeability of a shared city, through Dana's reports, and through my own occasional deliberate monitoring when I think it's useful to understand the landscape. Their daughter was born in March of that first year. A healthy baby, by all accounts. I felt something about that. I'm still not entirely sure what to call it. Not nothing, but not what I would have expected either. There is a child in the world now who is my sister's daughter and my former husband's daughter, and she is innocent of everything that happened, and I try to hold that clearly when I think about her. Daniel and Claire are together. Whether they are happy is harder to assess. What I know is that the apartment they moved into was not a step up from the life either of them had been living. Daniel's professional setback was real and slow to recover from. He'd been passed over for a promotion around the time the divorce proceedings became known to people in his industry, the way these things become known. He's working again, but not at the level he was. Claire went back to work after her leave, part-time at first. I've heard through distant channels that things between her and Daniel are complicated in the way that relationships built on a specific kind of excitement often become complicated once the excitement collapses and the ordinary weight of life sets in. I don't know the details. I don't particularly want them. What I know is that the person I was before, the one who absorbed and accommodated and made herself smaller so that others could be comfortable, is not someone I'm going back to. I learned, through the worst kind of lesson, what it costs to make yourself invisible in your own life. The cost is your own life. I do not hate my sister. I have found, to my own surprise, that the hatred burned away faster than I expected, leaving behind something more like a kind of distant sadness, the way you might feel about a country you once loved and no longer live in. We have not spoken. I don't know if we ever will. That door isn't closed by anger. It's closed by the simple fact that I don't know what would be on the other side of opening it, and what I have on this side is too valuable to risk. My mother, before she died, used to say, "Some people show you who they are slowly, and some people show you all at once. Either way, believe them." I believe them now. 2 years ago, I was standing in my kitchen reading 4 words on a stranger's phone screen. Today, I'm sitting in a reading room I built for myself, in a house that is entirely mine. The lesson isn't about revenge. It's about this. Never negotiate from fear. Never act before you're ready, and never make yourself smaller to protect someone else's comfort. Document everything. Trust carefully. Know your worth before anyone else tries to calculate it for you. So tell me, what would you have done in my place? Leave a comment. I read everyone. And thank you, genuinely, for listening.